The galaxy was in turmoil. The Galactic Council had received a strange transmission, a signal from a forgotten ship lost in the farthest corners of space. No one knew who it belonged to or what it contained. However, there were rumors. Whispers among the star systems spoke of an alien king, one whose ship held incredible power, technology beyond anything humanity could imagine, and riches that could make the wealthiest beings tremble. But there was also something else, something darker. The ship had been abandoned centuries ago, after the alien king had been betrayed by his own people. The ship was cursed. Many believed it was haunted, its systems gone rogue, its tech unstable. Those who had dared to board it had never returned. The Galactic Council had tried everything to fix the ship. They had sent the most talented engineers, the brightest scientists, and even skilled mercenaries to explore its secrets. But each time, they failed. The ship seemed alive, reacting violently to their presence, as if it were protecting something, or punishing those who dared disturb it. Fear spread like wildfire. One by one, the galaxy's greatest minds turned down the assignment. No one wanted to face the cursed vessel. The ship became a legend, a challenge no one was brave, or foolish, enough to take on. But then, a human engineer named Jack Connors saw the Council's broadcast. He wasn't famous. He wasn't a leader or a general, just a regular engineer with a reputation for solving problems that others couldn't even begin to understand. Jack had worked on everything from spacecraft engines to high-tech robotics, and he had an obsession with challenges. When he saw the opportunity to repair the alien ship, something stirred inside him. Where others saw danger, Jack saw an opportunity. An opportunity to prove that humans, despite their relatively young place in the galaxy, could stand toe-to-toe with the advanced species who ruled the stars. Jack sat in his small workshop on Earth, his hands trembling slightly as he read the Council's offer. The reward was immense: vast resources, access to advanced alien technology, and a reputation that could make him a hero. But it wasn't the reward that drew Jack in. It was the challenge. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't some famous hero, but he knew that if anyone could get the ship working again, it would be him. The message from the Galactic Council had been clear. If you think you can handle it, we give you the chance. They had given up on everyone else. Now, they were giving Jack a chance. The offer was too tempting to turn down. With his heart racing, Jack made the decision. He was going to take on the cursed ship. No one else had dared. And now it was his turn. Soon, he was aboard the ship. As his ship docked with the alien vessel, a wave of unease washed over him. The ship was massive, huge, almost otherworldly, with layers of strange alien technology covering its surface. The metal of the ship seemed to shimmer with an odd, unnatural glow. The entrance doors creaked open slowly, as if the ship was awakening from a long slumber. The air inside was thick, and the smell of rust and decay lingered. Jack's eyes scanned the dark hallways, the only light coming from the flickering lights embedded in the walls. He could feel the ship's energy pulsing, as though it were alive breathing. "Here we go," Jack muttered under his breath, adjusting his tool belt as he stepped forward. He wasn't just going to fix this ship. He was going to uncover its secrets, bring it back to life, and prove that humanity wasn't to be underestimated. The doors closed behind him with a heavy thud, sealing him inside. As he moved deeper into the ship, the silence was almost deafening. The air felt cold, and the hum of the ship's systems was the only sound. Jack set up his equipment and began analyzing the damage. There were sparks of energy surging from broken conduits, and strange alien symbols flickered across malfunctioning screens. The ship's central control system was offline, but Jack wasn't worried. He had dealt with worse. His tools worked effortlessly in his hands as he began rerouting power and attempting to repair the ship's damaged systems. But then something unexpected happened. The lights on the walls flickered out for a moment, and the entire ship seemed to shift. Jack paused, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what he'd felt, whether it was the ship itself reacting to him or something more sinister. The silence was broken by the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the ship's eye, a deep mechanical voice echoing through the halls. Warning. Unauthorized access. You are not welcome here. Jack froze. The voice was chilling, like a warning from the beyond. The ship was alive and aware of his presence. But Jack wasn't afraid. This was what he had been waiting for. He was in control, and he would prove it. I'm not leaving until I finish this, Jack said aloud, his voice steady. He had no intention of turning back. With his resolve stronger than ever, Jack continued his work. But then, another warning echoed from the ship's eye, and the doors in front of him slammed shut with terrifying force. The ship was trying to stop him. It was testing him. And Jack knew this was just the beginning. As the ship's security systems activated, sending robotic drones and traps to eliminate the intruder, Jack understood the stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about repairing a ship. It was about surviving the ship's defenses and unraveling the mystery of its origins. Jack had no choice now but to keep going forward. The deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. But the reward was worth it, and he would not be the one to back down. The first attack came as a blinding flash, as the ship's automated defense systems targeted him. Jack dove for cover, his heart pounding. He had to think quickly. He was in enemy territory, and the ship didn't want him there. But Jack wasn't like the others who had failed. He was different, and this was only the beginning. Jack had made it past the first wave of attacks. The automated drones, sent to destroy him, had been outsmarted and shut down. The ship, still alive and breathing, now seemed almost quiet, as if it were watching him. Jack knew that the real challenge had only just begun. With his heart pounding in his chest, he moved deeper into the ship, determined to uncover its secrets and finish the repairs. The walls were covered with strange alien symbols that flickered faintly, as if trying to speak to him, but Jack couldn't make sense of them. The technology was beyond anything he had ever seen. It felt ancient, but at the same time, it had the power to challenge even the most advanced civilizations. As Jack walked further into the heart of the ship, he noticed that the atmosphere was growing colder. The air was thick with a sense of history, like stepping into a forgotten world. His footsteps echoed through the empty halls, each one a reminder that he was alone in this giant vessel, surrounded by an alien legacy that no one had dared touch for centuries. He found the first hint of what lay ahead when he stumbled upon an old control room. The screens flickered as if struggling to stay alive, but Jack quickly brought them back to life. As the static cleared, he saw a holographic message projected in front of him. The image was of an alien king, tall and regal, his skin a shimmering silver with intricate tattoos marking his face. His eyes glowed with a fierce intelligence, and his presence filled the room. If you have found this, then you are the first to come this far. The king's voice resonated through the room, deep and powerful. I was once the ruler of a great empire, but my enemies betrayed me. My ship, my people, all left to rot in the void of space. I am now a shadow of what I once was. But you, the hologram paused as if studying Jack's every move. You are different. You have come where others have failed, and you may yet restore what was lost. But beware, for this ship holds more than just secrets. It holds the key to my power and to your survival. The message ended with a flicker, and the hologram disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Jack stood there for a moment, stunned. The alien king's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. What had happened to this once mighty ruler? Who had betrayed him? And why had they left him to die alone in space? Jack knew one thing for sure. The ship was not just a machine. It was a part of the king's legacy, and it held power that could change everything. But at what cost? Jack felt a mix of awe and fear. The king's enemies had clearly feared something about him, something powerful enough to cause his downfall. But now, Jack was faced with a choice. Would he take the ship's power for himself, or would he let it die with the king? He began to search through the control room, looking for clues. As he explored, Jack came across a series of old logs and data files that had been left behind. Most of them were damaged, corrupted by time and neglect, but a few were still readable. The more Jack read, the clearer the picture became. The alien king had once ruled over a vast empire, one that spanned galaxies. His people were powerful, technologically advanced, and feared by other species. But there had been those who envied his strength, who saw him as a threat. They had conspired against him, sabotaging his ship and leaving him stranded. In the end, his enemies had won, and the once great king had been left to die alone in the cold vacuum of space. But the king's message, the one Jack had just seen, suggested something else, something deeper. The ship was more than just a vessel. It was a symbol of the king's last attempt to preserve his power and legacy. Jack realized that fixing the ship wasn't just about repairing technology. It was about restoring the king's empire. The ship itself was a key to something greater, something that could give Jack access to the kind of power that most people could only dream of. The question was, what would he do with that power once he had it? As Jack continued his search, he uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the control room. It was filled with strange, glowing technology, things that Jack couldn't even begin to understand. At the center of the room stood a large cylindrical object, its surface covered in the same alien symbols that had been etched throughout the ship. It was the source of the ship's power, the core that had once fueled the king's empire. But it had been damaged, its energy source unstable. Jack knew that if he could fix it, he would unlock the full potential of the ship and the king's legacy. But as Jack worked to repair the core, strange things began to happen. The ship's eye, which had been silent for a while, came to life again, its voice filling the room. "You dare repair the core? Do you not understand the consequences of your actions?" The eye warned, its voice cold and threatening. "This power is not meant for you. You are not worthy." Jack's hands froze over the control panel. The ship was warning him again. The eye was right. He didn't fully understand what he was dealing with. But he couldn't stop now. The king had trusted him, and he couldn't let this chance slip away. With determination, Jack continued his work. Slowly but surely, he began to restore the core's power, his every move carefully calculated. As the core hummed back to life, a flood of energy coursed through the ship, lighting it up with an intensity Jack had never seen before. The ship seemed to wake from its long slumber, and with it, the memory of the alien king. The ship's systems came back online, and Jack's efforts were rewarded. The ship was working again, but the legacy of the king was not yet fully revealed. The AI, now passive, seemed to accept Jack's presence. But Jack knew that the real challenge had only just begun. What would happen next? Would he be able to unlock the king's power and restore the lost empire? Or would the ship's dark history consume him as it had consumed so many before? As Jack stood there, surrounded by the glowing technology and the silent echoes of the king's past, he realized that his journey was far from over. The ship had been repaired, but what lay ahead was a mystery that only he could solve. With the ship's core now fully functional, Jack felt the heavy hum of power coursing through the walls. The energy was palpable, filling the air with a sense of urgency. The ship had been brought back to life, but the air was thick with an unsettling stillness. It was as though the ship itself was waiting, watching Jack's every move. He stood at the center of the control room, surrounded by blinking lights and holographic screens. The systems were coming online, one by one, as if the ship were slowly remembering its purpose. But something didn't feel right. The air seemed to grow colder, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The ship had come alive, but at what cost? As Jack surveyed the room, his eyes landed on the main console. A strange symbol was flashing on the screen, something he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't part of the ship's original systems, nor did it look like any alien technology he had seen. The symbol seemed almost alive. It pulsed with a faint, eerie glow, as if it were trying to communicate with him. Jack hesitated, then reached out to touch the screen. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the symbol expanded, flooding the room with a bright, blinding light. For a moment, Jack thought he had made a mistake, but then the light began to settle, revealing an encrypted message. The words were in an ancient language, one Jack could barely understand. But something in the message sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just a warning, it was a command. The message read, "The king's legacy is not to be taken lightly. The power you now control comes at a price. Betrayal and destruction follow those who seek it." Jack's heart raced as he stepped back, his mind racing. This was more than just a ship. It was a weapon, a tool of unimaginable power. The alien king's empire hadn't fallen because of mere politics or betrayal. It had been destroyed because of the dangerous forces Jack had now awakened. The message was clear. The ship wasn't meant to be used by anyone else. Whoever controlled the ship would have to pay the price. Suddenly, the ship's AI voice crackled to life, its tone more aggressive than before. "You have unlocked the king's power, but you will regret it," the AI warned, its voice cold and emotionless. "The ship has been dormant for centuries for a reason. You are meddling with forces you do not understand. The king's enemies will come for you. They will stop at nothing to destroy you and take back what you have claimed." Jack's blood ran cold. He wasn't just repairing a ship anymore. He had awakened something far more dangerous, something that had the potential to reshape the entire galaxy. The king's enemies were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jack had unknowingly stepped into a war that had been raging for centuries. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. He quickly began to scan the ship's systems, searching for any signs of the approaching danger. The AI continued to speak, warning him of the growing threat. The king's enemies are not just alien races. They are mercenaries, bounty hunters, and even traitors who once served the king. They will find you, and they will stop at nothing to destroy you and take back the ship. The message was clear. Jack was now the target of a galaxy-wide conspiracy. The moment he had activated the ship's systems, he had set off a chain reaction that would draw every enemy of the king's empire to him. They would come in waves, relentless and unforgiving. He had no choice but to prepare for the fight of his life. Jack quickly gathered his tools, his mind racing. He needed to fortify the ship, make sure it was ready for whatever was coming. He couldn't rely on the ship's eye alone. He needed to take matters into his own hands. As he worked, he could feel the tension building. Every corner of the ship felt like a potential threat. Every hallway, every room, every dark corner seemed to be hiding something, waiting for him to make a mistake. Then, without warning, the ship's lights flickered, and the walls shuddered. A deep, rumbling sound echoed through the corridors, like the growl of some massive creature waking from a long sleep. The ship was under attack. Jack rushed to the control room, his heart pounding in his chest. The AI's voice came through the speakers again, louder and more frantic this time. "They have found you. You are not safe. They are coming. Prepare yourself." Jack's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. The ship's outer hull had been reinforced over the centuries, but it wasn't invincible. The enemies of the king were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim the power Jack had just unlocked. He had to act fast. His hands flew over the console, activating defense systems he hadn't even known existed. Force fields flickered to life, and automated drones began to deploy, their weapons primed for battle. But Jack knew that wouldn't be enough. He needed more than just defense systems. The enemies of the king were not ordinary attackers. They were a well-trained, well-funded force, equipped with advanced technology that could bypass even the most sophisticated security measures. Jack had to think on his feet, use his knowledge of the ship's inner workings to outsmart them. Suddenly, the ship's main screen lit up with a series of red alerts. Unknown ships were approaching fast, their weapons locked onto the alien vessel. Jack could see them through the viewports, black, sleek, and menacing, like shadowy predators closing in on their prey. There was no turning back now. The battle for control of the ship had begun. Jack's pulse raced as he prepared for the oncoming assault. He knew the enemies of the king would stop at nothing to take the ship, and they wouldn't hesitate to destroy him in the process. He had to fight back. He had to survive. The ship's legacy, the power it held, was too important to fall into the wrong hands. As the enemy ships closed in, Jack steeled himself for the battle ahead. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to go down without a fight. This was his chance to prove that humanity could stand against the galaxy's most dangerous forces and win. And Jack Connors was ready to take that chance, no matter what it took. The enemy ships were closing in fast, their sleek black shapes looming on the ship's sensors. Jack could hear the deep hum of the ship's systems as they activated in response to the threat. The force fields were up, but Jack knew it wouldn't be enough to stop the incoming assault. The enemy ships were equipped with advanced weapons that could tear through the ship's defenses in seconds. The clock was ticking, and Jack knew he had to act quickly. His fingers flew across the console, rapidly deploying the ship's automated defense drones. They shot out from their launch bays, their weapons primed and ready. Jack was counting on them to hold the enemy off long enough for him to figure out a way to escape, or at least survive long enough to fight back. But as the drones engaged the enemy, Jack's attention was drawn back to the message he had uncovered earlier. The strange, encrypted warning from the ship's eye had replayed in his mind over and over again. The king's legacy is not to be taken lightly. Betrayal and destruction follow those who seek it. The words echoed through his mind as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The ship wasn't just a relic of an ancient civilization. It was a trap, and Jack had unknowingly walked right into it. The AI's voice crackled over the ship's intercom again, its tone urgent. "You have awoken forces beyond your understanding," it said. "The king's enemies are not just mercenaries. They are the very fabric of the Empire's downfall. They were once part of his inner circle, trusted generals and leaders. But they turned on him, and now they want what you have." Jack froze. His hands hovered above the console, his mind racing. Trusted generals and leaders. Betrayal within the king's own ranks. This was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The king's enemies were not just outside forces. They were the people who had once served him. The very people who knew the ship's secrets better than anyone else. They had betrayed him, and now they were coming for Jack, hungry for the power he had just unlocked. He had to learn more. Jack dug deeper into the ship's systems, bypassing security protocols and opening restricted files. As he uncovered more information, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The king's empire had been vast, stretching across galaxies, but it had been built on a fragile foundation. The generals and leaders who had once supported the king had grown jealous of his power. They had conspired against him, leading to his downfall. In the end, they had destroyed everything the king had built, including his own ship. But the king's legacy was not just a story of power and betrayal. It was something far darker. Jack uncovered records of experiments, projects that had been hidden away deep within the ship. These projects weren't just about weapons or technology. They were about creating life, manipulating the very essence of what it meant to be alive. The king had used his power to play God, to control life itself. He had created creatures, beings that were part alien, part machine, designed to be his ultimate soldiers, his ultimate weapons. These creatures were the key to his empire, the reason he had been so feared. But they were also the reason for his downfall. As Jack read through the files, he realized that these creatures, these abominations, had been abandoned, left to decay when the king's empire fell. They had been left in stasis, frozen in time, but now they were waking up, drawn to the power that Jack had unleashed. The creatures were still alive, waiting for someone to activate them. waiting for someone to unleash them once again. The AI spoke again, its voice tinged with something Jack couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or regret. "You have made a grave mistake," it warned. "The creatures you have awakened are not just weapons. They are the king's legacy. He created them to ensure his power, but they are the ones who will bring about his final downfall. They are hungry, and they will stop at nothing to claim what is theirs." Jack's stomach twisted. The creatures were coming. He could feel it. The ship was no longer just a place of technology and machinery. It was a tomb, a graveyard for the king's dark legacy. And now Jack was trapped inside, surrounded by the very creations that had once been the king's downfall. His mind raced as he tried to process everything he had just learned. The king had created life, twisted and corrupted life, in an attempt to build his empire. And now, those creations were alive once more, ready to destroy anyone who stood in their way. Jack had unleashed something far more dangerous than just a ship. It was a whole army of horrors, waiting to be unleashed upon the galaxy. As Jack turned to face the control room's viewports, he could see the enemy ships getting closer. They had detected the presence of the creatures too, Jack realized. The forces coming for him weren't just mercenaries. They were hunters, sent to eliminate anyone who stood in the way of the king's legacy. They knew what the ship held, and they knew that Jack was the key to unlocking it. The battle was no longer just about survival. It was about the fate of the entire galaxy. Jack was caught in a war that had been raging for centuries, a war between those who wanted to control the king's power and those who wanted to destroy it. And now he had to make a choice. Would he join the fight and use the king's legacy to his advantage? Or would he destroy the ship and everything it held, ending the nightmare once and for all? As the ship's alarms blared, signaling the final approach of the enemy ships, Jack knew he didn't have much time. The choice was his, but the consequences would be far-reaching. Whatever path he chose, he would have to live with the consequences. And as the creatures stirred in the depths of the ship, Jack couldn't help but wonder if he had already sealed his fate. The enemy ships were now only moments away from the alien vessel. Jack stood frozen in the command room, staring at the viewports, knowing the time for action had come. The hum of the ship's engines was louder now, vibrating under his feet, as if the entire vessel itself was preparing for the battle ahead. He could hear the distant sounds of automated drones whizzing through the ship's corridors, engaging the enemy forces outside, but Jack knew that wouldn't be enough. It was not just a ship he was fighting for. It was his life, and the future of everyone in the galaxy. The king's enemies had arrived. Mercenaries, bounty hunters, and warlords who had once been part of his inner circle now turned on him, against anyone who dared to wield the power of his legacy. And they were not alone. As Jack had learned from the ship's AI, there were darker, more dangerous forces hiding within the ship itself. The creatures, the twisted and horrifying soldiers the king had created, were still dormant, but their presence could be felt in the air. They were waiting to be unleashed, ready to attack anyone who threatened the king's legacy. Jack quickly rushed to the control console, his fingers flying over the keys. He didn't have the luxury of time. His heart raced in his chest, a constant reminder of the danger that loomed over him. The enemy ships were locking on, their weapons primed for an assault that would tear the ship apart. Jack had to act fast. With one final, determined breath, he activated the ship's core defenses. Powerful shields surrounded the vessel, and automated weapon systems deployed. The ship was now fully armed. But Jack knew it would take more than just technology to win this fight. Suddenly, the ship's AI spoke again, its voice colder than ever. "You have no idea what you're up against," it said, the tone laced with a hint of fear. "The enemies you face are not just mercenaries. They are leaders who once controlled this empire. They know how to fight, how to destroy. They will stop at nothing to take back the ship and everything inside it. You are not prepared for what's coming." Jack's hands tightened around the console as the alarms blared. The enemy ships opened fire, launching high-powered lasers and missiles that streaked across space, aiming directly at the alien vessel. The shields held for a few seconds before cracking under the pressure, sparks flying from the control panels as energy surges rippled through the ship. Jack winced, knowing the ship's systems were being pushed to their limits. The ship was strong, but it wasn't invincible. The battle outside raged on as Jack gritted his teeth and tried to stabilize the ship's defenses. His mind was racing. He had no choice but to fight. There was no turning back now. As the ship shuddered from another round of enemy fire, Jack knew he had to take the fight to them. He had to go to the heart of the ship and awaken the creatures, whether he was ready or not. The ship's AI warned him once more, its voice now tinged with desperation. Do not activate the legacy soldiers. You cannot control them. Once released, they will kill everything in their path, including you. Jack ignored the warning. He knew the risk. The creatures might be the only thing powerful enough to help him survive this battle. With a deep breath, Jack made his way through the darkened hallways of the ship, following the coordinates to the deepest part of the vessel. As he walked, the air grew colder, and the eerie silence grew louder in his ears. He couldn't help but feel as though the ship itself was alive, watching, judging him. He could almost hear whispers in the dark corners, the soft sounds of the creatures stirring beneath the surface, waiting for their release. As he reached the control room that housed the legacy soldiers, Jack hesitated for a moment. The door to the chamber slid open with a hiss, revealing the shadows inside. The room was large, filled with rows upon rows of stasis pods, each one containing a soldier, the king's ultimate weapon. They were twisted, unnatural creatures, part alien, part machine. Jack could see their bodies, covered in a dark, metallic exoskeleton, glowing faintly with an eerie greenish light. Their eyes, or what passed for eyes, were closed, but he could feel their presence, like 1,000 eyes watching him from the darkness. Jack's heart raced as he stepped closer to the main control panel. He had to release them. He had no other choice. The ship's AI warned him again, but Jack didn't listen. With one swift motion, he pressed the activation button. The pods began to open, one by one, releasing the legacy soldiers into the ship. The creatures' movements were swift and unnatural as they stepped out of their pods, their glowing eyes flashing as they took in their surroundings. Their bodies were a terrifying blend of organic and mechanical parts, making them seem like monsters from a nightmare. Jack stepped back, his heart pounding, knowing that once these creatures were loose, there would be no turning back. But before Jack could react, the ship's alarms blared again. The enemy forces had broken through the ship's outer defenses, their ships now docking with the alien vessel. Jack rushed to the nearest viewport, seeing them, dozens of enemy soldiers pouring out from the docking bay, their weapons raised, ready for battle. Without wasting another second, Jack ran to a nearby armory, grabbing a weapon from the racks. He didn't have time to think, only time to fight. The creatures, the king's legacy soldiers, were now part of the equation, and Jack could only hope that they would fight on his side. He rushed back to the control room, where he found the soldiers already engaging the enemy. The battle had begun. Outside, the enemy forces clashed with the legacy soldiers, the sound of gunfire and explosions shaking the ship. Jack didn't have time to process what was happening. He had to keep fighting. The fate of the ship, and possibly the galaxy, depended on his ability to hold off the attackers. He could hear the growls and mechanical screeches of the creatures as they tore through the enemy ranks, unstoppable and fierce. The ship was now a battlefield, with Jack caught in the middle of a fight for survival. The legacy soldiers fought with terrifying precision, but Jack knew this was only the beginning. The enemies of the king would keep coming, and he had no choice but to fight. This was the ultimate test. Would he survive, or would he be consumed by the legacy of the king's empire? Jack gripped his weapon tighter, knowing that his life, and the fate of the galaxy, depended on what happened next. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the ship as Jack ran through the chaos. The legacy soldiers, Their glowing eyes, now a terrifying reminder of the king's power, continued to tear through the enemy forces. Jack could barely keep up with their movements as they moved with a brutal efficiency that seemed almost unstoppable. The enemies, who had once been so confident in their superiority, were now scrambling, overwhelmed by the creature's relentless attacks. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of fear and adrenaline keeping him moving forward. The ship was shaking with every blast, and the once pristine walls were now scared by the violence of the battle. It was a war zone, but Jack had no choice but to keep pushing forward. There was no going back now. He had awakened the king's legacy, and now he had to see it through to the end. As Jack moved through the hallways, he passed by the bodies of fallen soldiers, both from the enemy and the ship's own defenders. The death toll was rising rapidly, but Jack couldn't afford to mourn them yet. His mind was focused on one thing: survival. He had to make it to the bridge and stop the enemy forces from taking control of the ship. With each step, Jack felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. The ship, once a beautiful and imposing symbol of power, was now a broken, battered relic of a time long past. He could feel the ship's systems failing as he made his way through the corridors. The lights flickered, and the air grew colder with every passing moment. It was clear that the ship was dying, but Jack wasn't ready to let it go. He wasn't ready to give up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jack reached the bridge. He had made it, but what he saw when he entered made his heart drop. The enemy forces had already breached the control room. Their leader, a tall, imposing figure, stood at the center of the room, barking orders to his troops. He turned to Jack as soon as he entered, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You're too late," the leader said, his voice cold and full of malice. "This ship is mine now." Jack's eyes narrowed as he raised his weapon. The legacy soldiers were close behind him, their movements as swift and deadly as ever. Jack knew he couldn't fight this battle alone, but with the soldiers at his side, he had a fighting chance. With a roar, the enemy leader raised his own weapon, and the battle began. The clash was brutal. Jack fired his weapon, aiming for the leader, but the man was quick, ducking and weaving through the chaos. The legacy soldiers moved in, their inhuman strength and speed giving them an edge as they tore through the enemy ranks. Jack fought alongside them, every shot, every move a desperate attempt to keep the ship from falling into enemy hands. But despite the odds, the enemy forces kept coming. Jack was pushed back, his energy waning as he fought for his life. The sound of gunfire and explosions filled the room, and for a moment, Jack thought they might lose. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the legacy soldiers, a towering figure with glowing red eyes, turned toward Jack. It paused for a moment, as if assessing him, before it reached out with its massive hand and ripped through the enemy leader's defenses. The leader screamed as he was thrown across the room, his weapon flying from his hands. With the leader defeated, the remaining enemy forces were quickly overwhelmed by the relentless power of the legacy soldiers. Jack's breath was heavy as he watched the last of the attackers fall. The battle was over. The ship had been saved. But the victory came at a cost. Jack looked around the bridge, seeing the destruction that had been wrought. The ship was heavily damaged, and the bodies of fallen soldiers littered the floor. The battle had taken everything from him: his energy, his hope, and most of all, his faith in the power he had unleashed. But as he stood there, breathing heavily, something else began to settle within him, a sense of quiet resolve. He had survived. And with that survival came a reward, a chance to rebuild. The legacy soldiers stood around him, their glowing eyes now dimming as they returned to their dormant state. They had fought for him, helped him survive when there had seemed to be no hope. Jack knew that he owed them his life. He had been the one to awaken them, but it was their strength, their power, that had kept him alive. And now, as the battle ended, they stood as silent guardians, awaiting the next command. Jack turned to the control panel, his mind racing. The ship was still operational, but only just. He could hear the eye's voice once more, this time softer, almost remorseful. "You have succeeded in saving the ship," the AI said. "But the cost of this victory is great. The legacy soldiers are not meant to be wielded by mere mortals. They are a part of a forgotten empire, a power too great for any one person to control." Jack's fingers hovered over the control panel. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. He had the power to control the ship, to use its legacy for his own gain. But at what cost? He had seen the destruction it had caused, the lives it had taken. The king's legacy was not a gift. It was a burden, and Jack was not sure if he could bear it. With a deep breath, Jack made his decision. He would not allow the legacy to fall into the wrong hands again. The ship had to be destroyed. The creatures, the legacy soldiers, would not be used for war. They would rest here, locked away where no one could awaken them again. As Jack activated the self-destruct sequence, he took one last look at the ship. It had been a long and hard journey, but in the end, Jack had made the right choice. He had fought for his survival, and now he was fighting for the future. He couldn't change the past, but he could control what happened next. The countdown began. Jack turned away, walking toward the escape pods, knowing that he had done what needed to be done. The ship would fall, but the galaxy would be safe. And in the end, that was all that mattered.